Radio TV phono nut in part 2 of this RCA scholastic classroom phonograph. I found a couple of generic matching knobs to put on here, but the shafts are so short that the knobs you can turn them, but they're almost rubbing up against the motor board. But we're not going to worry about that. It is what it is. But the main reason for this video is I don't really like the performance of this tone control circuit, and we're going to try to modify that just as soon as the Crosley spy plane gets through flying over. And I went ahead and listed this on Facebook Marketplace for $35 because I know that if somebody actually shows interest, they're going to want to get it for $20 or $25. So that'll give us some wiggle room. So far, the only response that I've gotten is some message from somebody with a name that just looks like a bunch of letters jumbled up together, asking me if this is still available and what's the price. Well, number one, if it wasn't still available, it wouldn't be up. But more importantly, the price is plainly listed, so you don't have to ask me what the price is. But it's been my experience, those messages you get from these weird names that you can't pronounce that have weird profile pictures, those are just scammers that are just looking to still get your personal information so they can either steal your identity or they want your bank account number so they can supposedly deposit the funds directly into your account. But what they really want to do is clean your account out, and we're not going for that. It's like Shango commented on the last video that pretty much Facebook has basically turned into a trash site, and I'd do better off just dumping it, and my life would be so much better without it. And I tend to agree with him on that, so my Facebook activity may be severely limited from now on. And I know that pretty much what's lurking around on what I call those Facebook baby clothes and cell phone pages are nothing more than bottom feeders. If it's not somebody looking to get something perfect for $5, it's some scammer like what I just described, and I don't have time for that crap. Alright, let's open this up and see where we are with this tone control circuit and see if we can make it better. And with this polarized cord, I've got my leg on the concrete and I'm touching the tone arm and not getting any kind of sensation at all, even with it off. So, as long as it's plugged into a properly wired outlet, you won't get popped. Now this is what I mean with the tone control. You turn it towards the extreme bass position and it almost kills it.
I said, good morning, Mr. Echo. How are you today?
So, let's open it up and see if we can do something about that. Oh, and I also cleaned up this motor board a little bit. It's still not perfect, but it's a lot better than it was. Okay, I've drawn up a rather crude schematic. Pardon my artistic abilities, they're not that great. I didn't draw the whole power supply, just the cathode of the rectifier tube and its components coming off of that, because that's all we're interested in. Coming off the cathode, we have one filter capacitor in number 1 here, which feeds B+ to the primary of the audio output transformer. And of course the other side comes out and connects to the plate of the audio output tube. Then we go through a 4.7K resistor to our second filter capacitor, number 2, which connects to the screen grid of the audio output tube. And also connected to the screen grid, we have a 270K ohm plate load resistor that connects to the plate of the 12AV6 tube. Now coming in here we have our cartridge, which is paralleled by a 270K ohm loading resistor. I suspect the reason they have that there is because in this particular record player, the speakers are not very well isolated like they are in some of the higher powered classroom record players. Those usually have the speakers or speaker, which is usually a 6x9 mounted on a separate board, which is suspended on springs to prevent feedback. Well, this particular model doesn't really have that, so I'm sure they have this resistor there to pad down the output of the cartridge so it won't drive the amplifier to a volume level that would cause feedback between the cartridge and the speaker. So then we go into the top end of the volume control. Bottom end of the volume control goes to ground with a disc capacitor. I haven't looked at the value of it yet, but it's pretty small, between the wiper of the volume control and ground. I suspect that's there to possibly strip off any RF that might possibly get into the audio chain. So it'll pull any RF that might happen to get into ground. And then we have a 0.05 coupling cap between the wiper of the volume control and the control grid of the 12AV6 preamp tube. And this is where things get a little interesting. Instead of having a fixed resistor from the control grid of the preamp tube to ground, which is typically anywhere between, say, 3.3 meg and 10 meg, we have a tone control, a potentiometer that's our tone control, top end connected to the control grid, bottom end connected to ground, and we have another disc capacitor connected between the control grid and the wiper of this tone control. Then the wiper of the tone control connects to our 0.15 microfarad cap, and the other end of that cap connects to the cathode of the 12AV6. And then for our cathode bias resistor, we have a 560 ohm resistor from the cathode to ground. And then these components here are our feedback line, which utilizes a extra secondary winding on the audio output transformer. You can see it goes back through a 2.2K resistor and then a 0.15 cap back to our cathode here. And then coming off of the plate of the 12AV6, this is pretty much standard, our 270K ohm plate load resistor that I already mentioned. And then we go through a 0.02 microfarad coupling cap to the control grid of the audio output tube, and then our standard 470K ohm grid resistor, and then our standard 150 ohm cathode resistor in parallel with a 20 microfarad electrolytic capacitor. And then of course our screen grid of the audio output tube, like I already mentioned, gets its voltage from 0.2 here on our power supply. And then of course the plate comes out through to the primary winding on the audio output transformer, and that gets its supply from our higher voltage number 1 source on our power supply. Now, what I probably am going to end up doing is replacing this tone control with a fixed resistor for our control grid here, and moving the tone control and a capacitor over here to our plate circuit of the audio output tube. Okay, I found this diagram on a Finola Model 657. It's dated 1958. This is very, very similar to what we have, except for some minor changes that we're going to incorporate into this newer one we have here. Of course, this is also made by Waters Conley, which is the same company who made this other one we're working. Now, if you'll look here at the 12AV6, our tone control is still on the control grid. It's a 1.5 meg pot between the control grid and ground, but instead of a 0.15 microfarad capacitor, it has a 1500 picofarad capacitor, much smaller value. So I think the first thing we're going to do is change that cap out to a .0015 microfarad and see what that does for it. And if it does, and if it's satisfactory, we'll leave it alone. If not, we'll rewire our existing amplifier how this one is wired up. Okay, that's good. Just go completely out of focus. That ought to make people happy. Okay, it's still going to mess. But yeah, the main difference I see between this one and the other one is on this one, the one end of the tone capacitor connects to ground. On the one we're working on, it connects to the cathode of the 12AV6, which of course has a 560 ohm resistor between cathode and ground. But we're going to change that big honking .15 out and put a .0015 in there and see how that sounds. Okay, I can tell you this capacitor is a replacement because the end that was connected to the tube socket, I just barely touched it with my soldering iron and it came off. And as you might remember in the last video, somebody had the end that was connected to the tone control on the wrong lug, so I think this was a case of it probably having a .0015 in it before, and somebody got confused and put a .15 in there. Okay, I have a .0015 temporarily tacked in. We're going to give it a test run, and if I like the results, we'll put it in more professional-like, and if I don't like the results, we'll go another route. Alright, that gives us no tone control whatsoever. So back to the drawing board. Alright, that's better. That's all the way to the bass end.
Whenever I have trouble, I know just what to do.
And of course, we're still getting some overall signal attenuation, which you're going to get. But a .015 won't be nearly as bad as a .15, so we'll now put that capacitor in more permanent-like, and then this thing will be in better shape. Okay, there it is, and I did it with as little twisting and bending as I had to, because after what happened to this tube socket terminal that broke in the last video, likely from whoever worked on this before me bending and twisting on it, I wasn't going to take any chances with the other one because it had been just my luck that it would have broke flush off with the tube socket and wouldn't have left me any room to solder to. Okay, the original cartridge loading resistor was 270K. The one on the older schematic was 560K. I didn't have any 560, so I just went up to a 680. That ought to give it a little more bass and a tad bit more volume. And it's obvious that this thing was recapped at some time in the past, probably sometime in the 70s, maybe even the 80s, based on what I saw. Whenever I unsoldered this tone control capacitor, I found remnants of an old capacitor lead that was still on the tube socket pin. And all three of these tubes are later model Sylvania tubes, look like from the same era. Well, they're prior to 81, because I think in 81 that's when they went to being branded as Phillips ECG tubes, when North American Phillips bought out Sylvania from GTE. But I'm really surprised, even in the late 70s, early 80s, that any school bothered to have this thing totally overhauled, because by that time this thing was already pushing 20 years old, and you'd have thought they'd just bought a new record player. But maybe it was a low-budget school district, and whoever fixed this was doing all of the contract repair work for the school district, and they got a much better rate than what any Joe Blow would have gotten had they brought this in off the street. Who knows? Alright, let's put it back together and see what it sounds like. Alright.
farmer.
That's in the extreme bass position.
And it started in a planning for his wedding suit to keep purchased for only $1. But then he found out he was...
That's much better.
And so he...
Now you might remember in the last video I mentioned that I used a cartridge with dual LP tips, but this 78 is one of the budget label ones with 2 songs per side, and I think the grooves are spaced a little bit closer together than a standard 78, so the LP needle's playing it okay. I also chose this record because it's something that's not as likely to trigger the content ID and possibly get me a copyright claim, or even worse, a copyright strike. I mean, nothing's any worse than to use some song for demonstration or repair purposes, and you end up having to scrap the whole video just because the video got blocked because you dare use 20 seconds of a song to test a record player or whatever. Yeah, that's much better. Don't want to let that play too long. That might get me a copyright strike. What is the name of this for those who are interested? Pete and Tail, Keep It Up. Okay. Yeah, haven't had time to do much electronics repair lately. We've been doing a lot of long overdue yard work and cleaning up and waiting on a roofer to show up. I don't have any problems that I know of with the roof, but I got this nasty letter from my insurance company saying that they had sent someone out to take pictures and that my roof appeared to be worn and I needed to call a roofing contractor, and then I would be required to follow whatever recommendations that he makes or they're going to cancel my insurance. And of course we know that more than likely, you know what a roofing contractor is going to recommend because he wants a big payday. And quite frankly, I just don't like being backed into the wall by the insurance company because normally I'm not one to replace stuff when it's not giving me problems. And if the roof's not leaking, then in my mind it's not giving me problems. So that's where we are right now. So now, the roofer I called was recommended by a friend, and he told me that he'd be straight up with me. He said if you really don't need a roof right now, then he won't try to sell you one, and he'll write up something to get the insurance company off your butt. So hopefully he'll tell me we can put it off another few years. But if not, we'll just go ahead and do what needs to be done.
Mary, bright-eyed and merry, Mary, the little girl squirrel. She's quick as a wink and as neat as a pin.
But the only reason I'm out here today working on this is because it was supposed to rain, so we put the yard work on hold. And I thought I'd bring this outside to beat the rain since this is something that wasn't very involved. And my shop looks like a tornado ran through it. I'm in the process of trying to straighten it up during all of this. So, yeah, just decided to mess with this a little while I wasn't doing anything else. And as it happened, I indeed beat the rain. Yeah, it was kind of funny in the last video. Somebody commented that the 4 dislikes were from eBay executives. No, that's probably not it, because eBay wants to get rid of little folks like me anyway. They don't want the little nickel and dime sellers. They want the big power sellers that'll really make the money for them. I figure the 4 dislikes were from people who were outraged that I didn't replace the filter capacitor. Well, guess what? You can keep on being outraged because as you just saw, I didn't replace the filter capacitor in this video either. No, in all seriousness, I don't worry too much about likes and dislikes. If you've been on YouTube very long, you're going to get people that dislike your videos. I don't care what the content is. You could put a video up saying that you're giving a $100 bill to the first 20 people who responds, and there would still be people that didn't like it, probably the 21st person. But the way I look at what I put up is, as long as the majority of my viewers get something out of what I put up, then I'll keep putting it up, and the ones that don't like it, then, you know, they don't have to watch. And on that note, I was looking through my records, and, you know, we recently put up a few sound-alike budget records. Well, look at this that I found, the Bee Gees Songbook by PK and the Sound Explosion on Pickwick Records from 1977. This ought to be interesting. What makes the world go round? We were free. She melted like a with my love. You know how we really and let it be like I said it would be. We love you. But as far as selling this thing, I'd like to get rid of it locally if I could. If I can't get rid of it locally pretty quick, I'll try to find a box. I got rid of all my boxes not long ago, so I don't have much here in the way of boxes. And you know, if I can find I guess the pooch is getting wound up over a bird or squirrel or something. But yeah, if I can't get rid of this thing locally, then you know, I'll try to find a box and probably put it on one of the record player groups on Facebook, but probably going to still ask $35 for it. And quite frankly, if it's not worth $35 to anybody around here, then they probably don't want or need a record player very bad, especially after I modified it a little bit and got it to sounding a lot better than it did in the last video. And with the ludicrous prices that everybody's charging for shipping these days, then you know, I don't even know that it would be worth the cost of shipping this, because you know, to pack it up correctly and buy all the packing materials that's needed, you're probably looking at $40 or $50 to ship the thing, and you know, I wouldn't blame anybody for not wanting to do that, because it's probably not worth adding that much to it. So, but like I said, if I can't get rid of this locally, then you know, I'll probably reach out to some of the folks on the record player group on Facebook and on YouTube and what have you, and see if somebody wants it. But now that I modified it a little bit, it's really not a bad little record player. It's still not a Newcomb or a Caliphone or an Audiotronics, but it's not a bad unit. Alright, that's about all I've got for now. Maybe when we get through with all of the outdoor work that needs to be done and get my shop cleaned up, we can get back to some repair videos. I do have an RCA battery operated Tombstone radio video that's been languishing in my computer for a while now, so I'll probably edit all that together and release that in the next few days. But that's about all I've got for right now. Hope you got something out of this, and more to come later.